forward, follow me. If I hesitate, push me. If him may kill me, avenge me. If I am a traitor, kill me.
Gangsters, cops, and politicians, get ready to rock. We're on a mission. Each one of us shares our own vision. When I was on the yard, I went real hard. While I patrolled the streets, all the G's on me. When I was on the yard, I went real hard. While I patrolled the streets, all the G's on me.
Saludos, it's your host, Gabe Morales. We're returning for the second half of a roll call on Nuestra Familia members over the past 6 decades or so. Often people ask me, why are you so much into the subject of gangs? As I explained many times, although I was never a gang member, I was, I guess, what you can call an associate. I grew up around that environment. I had quite a few friends and family members who were gang members and or caught up in addiction and ran the streets and committed crimes to support their drug habits. My very first book was called Barrio Warfare, Violence in the Latino Community, which covered my observations on the tragic violence that I saw growing up. I've tracked prison gangs, including Mexican Mafia and Nuestra Familia, for most of my life. In fact, my life depended on knowing who was who that I bumped into. I encountered both Mexican Mafia and Nuestra Familia members in the late 1970s in Washington State. And during the 1980s, I encountered them of New Folsom Prison from 1987 to 1993. After I returned to the King County Jail in Seattle, Washington in 1993, I continued to work street gangs and prison gangs for almost 2.5 decades, and then returned for a short stint working as a lieutenant, often dealing with prison gang and drug cartel members, as well as organized crime groups at a federally controlled immigration detention center in Tacoma, Washington. I also was the founder and first president of the International Latino Gang Investigators Association, which brought together the who's who of gang experts concerning Hispanic gangs, meaning street gangs, prison gangs, and drug cartels. Sometimes people even ask me, you wish you could be a gang member, don't you? No, nothing could be further from the truth. My only goal here has been to educate you as listeners and even outside of YouTube to non-listeners via gang prevention services, which I've run for decades now, trying to prevent youngsters from getting into gangs and doing direct intervention with gang-affiliated youth. But back to the subject matter at hand. I'll start off today with Stuart Chino, a.k.a. Looney Nagata, who's out of Merced, but I also had ties to Fairfield. I show that he was a Northern Structure member around the year 2000, and then eventually was arrested a few years ago, I understand, whereby he attained Nuestra Familia status. Under CDC number B as in Bravo, M as in Mike, 7881. I show he is currently housed at New Folsom Prison. There was Jesse Cyclone Nahara out of San Ho, but I also show was encountered by law enforcement in Modesto in 2002. He started off with C number 83503 and was known as being a dope dealer. As you can see here in this picture, he looks like maybe he's been using some of his own product. I then showed that he was released on that C number, but came back with H number, as in Henry 46859, but I'm unsure of his current whereabouts. There was Ernest Nahara Sandoval, a.k.a. Joker. He may have been related to Jesse. If so, he likely would have been the younger brother. I show that he was in the California Youth Authority in 1980, was released, and then committed a homicide in May of 1981, whereby he was given D number 76785. I show that he paroled in 1986, but then returned to the Santa Clara County Jail in 1988 on a dope charge. and I believe also got popped for another homicide at that same time. I show that he was validated as being Northern Structure in 1994, but had parole by 2011. There was Frank Nanes out of Visa. I show that he was a Northern Structure member and entered CDC in February of 2012 under CDC number A as in Apple, K as in King, 7623. I then show that he was housed at High Desert State Prison in November of 2022 when he was shot and killed by a tower officer along with NF member Raul Quinn when they attacked an inmate by the name of Anthony Aguilera with inmate manufactured weapons. There was Earl Droopy Navarrete out of Bakersfield. I showed that he was Northern Structure in the 1980s under D number 81486. I show he had ties to Bakersfield, Sacramento, as well as San Francisco. Understand that he was shot by George Quinones, aka GQ Squad, over a girlfriend, and that Mad Dog Cervantes was also involved in that case. I showed that he was validated as being a Northern Structure associate in 1999, but was off his D number by the year 2000, and then appeared on several no-good lists. There was Roberto Navarez, a.k.a. Macaron, a.k.a. Hollywood, who I understood was related to the Rocha family out of Salinas. But Macaron was a member of Stockton's Little Unity Gang, which, as I've said before, was like a special hit squad for the NF, when he had B number 56635. Understand that he was involved in a homicide at DVI in September 1975, and also involved in several stabbings. By the early 1980s, he was considered to be at least a captain, if not a general, but I've been told had dropped out of the organization by the year 1999 and is now deceased. There was Raimundo, a.k.a. Moose Navarrete, who's called Moose because he was so big. He was out of San Jose, and I understand started off as a soldado at a very young age, and hung around some major players, such as Louis Dump Truck Chavez, pictured here with him. I show that Moose was sent to CDC in March of 2004. He was housed at Pelican Bay Shoe in the year 2012 and is currently housed at my old stomping grounds at New Folsom State Prison, aka California State Prison at Sacramento. There was Richard Navarro, who I show was out of the Bay Area but also had ties to Northeast Oregon. He was Northern Structure in the 1990s under K number 31553. I show that he was housed at Pelican Bay in 1996 and then incarcerated at Oregon DOC from 2002 to at least 2004. I then show that he was sent to the BOP on number 63882-080 and I understand was close to Tex Syndicate as well as Northern Structure, but I show was released in December of 2015. There was a Cesar Navas out of San Francisco Mission, the Mission District. I showed that he was Nuestra Raza in the 1990s under J number 37177. I showed that he was a meth dealer and sent to the feds under BOP number 96487-011 and was housed at Lompoc, among other BOP facilities, but was released in May of 2015. There was Philip Rebel Neri out of Bakersfield. He was considered to be a Blooming Flower associate. It was one of the main reasons why the Nuestra Familia Mexicana got down with the MA in September 1968. I show that Rebel had A numbers in Alpha 80263 when he was hit in March of 1968 by Mosca Solis and Bogus Pete Nunez of the Mexican Mafia, a hit which was ordered by Steve Calote Amador at San Quentin. Rebel was very close to Nuestra Familia Mexicana founder Chalo Hernandez, who was also from Bakers. But, ironically, MA shot caller Rodolfo Cheyenne Cadena, also from Bakers, went out with Neri's sister during the short time period he was out on the streets of Bakersfield in 1972, shortly before he was arrested on his way to do a hit to take out Chalo Hernandez. I find this very interesting because here Neri knew that the MA had hit him and thus aligned himself with the Nuestra Familia, sworn enemies of the Mexican Mafia. So it's my feeling that Cheyenne Cadena was probably going out with Neri's sister to gain further reconnaissance to take out Chalo Hernandez. Cheyenne Cadena was a lot smarter than most people realize, at least a lot smarter for his age. But, as you know, died violently at Chino's Palm Hall on December 17, 1972, at the hands of the NF. There was Isidro Sleepy-Neria out of Salas. He was an NF member in the mid-1970s under B number 51770. Understand he paroled in April 1976 and became a hermit. There was Charles Pepper Neveres from San Ho. I showed that he was an NF member in the 1980s under C number 45198. I showed that he was housed at Soledad in 1999 and San Quentin in 2002. Understand he was released on that C number, but then came back under T number, as in Thomas, 19114, and has been housed for many years now at Mule Creek State Prison, which tells me that he's definitely a dropout. Somebody asked me about the Nichols family. The way they spelled it, I believe one of the individuals they're referring to is Daniel, a.k.a. Danny Boy Nichols Fernandez, out of San Ho. I showed that he had a C number of 62028, and I believe was a Nuestra Familia associate at the very least. But he was only validated as being Northern Structure in 1990. I showed he was housed in New Folsom in 1988 when I was there, and then was released, but then came back with P number, St. Paul, 44954. He then was released on that one, but came back on V number, as in Victor, 62391. So this guy had a busy criminal career. I couldn't find out much more than that. So if any of you have more information, I'd appreciate a heads up. There was Charles Peanut Oak, who was a very controversial figure out of East Side Stockton. Understand he was locked up in the Youth Authority in the early 1990s and was housed at DVI in 1997. Then I understand he paroled from Kern Valley State Prison. He worked his way up the ranks to become an NF member and was known as being a bully. Understand that he got caught in a hard spot by the feds and agreed to end up working for them on Operation Valley Star, in particular snitching on major drug dealer Mario Diaz and street regimental commander Paqui Amaro. It's my understanding all the time he was snitching on NF members, he himself was dealing dope on the side and ordering hits on individuals such as Vincent Torres, who he had sliced by his supporters. I understand he even was getting dope deals on jailhouse phones. But evidently, all his negative karma caught up with him because he was killed in April 2017 out on the streets. And I understand that case is unsolved. There was Bismarck, a.k.a. Nicoya Ocampos, from San Francisco's E-Mob. Showed that he was validated as being Northern Structure in 1996 by CDC. He then paroled in 2001, but got busted by the feds under BOP number 17159-097. I showed that he was housed in Allenwood from 2011 to 2013, and then at Lewisburg in 2014. And I believe John Boxer Mendoza talks about him more in his book. There was Richard, a.k.a. Dickie Bird Ocho Torrenta, who had CDC number B as in Bravo, 34986. This individual is very interesting because I showed that he was with Familia Cinco in the early 1970s, but then had switched to the NF at DVI in 1973 and was still considered to be good, as evidenced by group pictures at DVI in 1977. So, as I explained in the Familia Cinco episode, it was made up of many former MAN West Familia members or individuals who couldn't get into either organization and had a bone to pick with them. But as Familia Cinco started to disintegrate, some of those individuals left and were accepted back into their organizations, which is something that hardly ever happens. I showed Dickie Bird was at Soledad in 1977 and become a hermit by 1978. I will briefly mention Antonio, a.k.a. Tony Ocon, or Okun, depending on how you pronounce it. He is another individual who was out of Fresno, who I understand was affiliated with Familia Cinco, and he was known to be a major drug dealer. At that time, the NF was going around shooting up Fresno, getting rid of riffraff, dropouts, extorting prostitutes, pimps, independent drug dealers, etc. By the mid-70s, as I stated, Familia Cinco was no longer in existence, and Tony Okun was killed by the NF on October 17, 1976. There was Luis Jr., a.k.a. Blockhead Olivares, out of San Ho. I mentioned him when I mentioned the Pablo Farfan homicide in September 1993. Olivares was convicted of that shooting and given K number 87832. I show that he was at the Sierra Conservation Center in 2012, by which time I believe he was considered to be a dropout, and is currently housed at CTF Soledad. There's Arthur Puppet Almost out of San Ho. I show he was an NF member in the 1970s under B number 76194. I show he was documented as being NF at DVI in 1974 and was known as a drug dealer in 1985. I believe he also was popped for a homicide in that year and was still considered NF in 1989. But I show is currently not in custody. There is Benny, a.k.a. Little Puppet, a.k.a. Moscow Ovencia, out of Daly City. I show he was housed at the Youth Authority in 1982 and had paroled in 1983, right about the time period that the XIV bonds came out. Understand that eventually he became a member of the Northern Structure under D number 43886. I then show he paroled in 1989, but was popped for PCP cells in 1993 and given H number 33969. I then show that he got released in 1995, but got popped for a hot one, a homicide in San Jose in August of 1996 and was given 15 years to life. They show that he was at CMF Vacaville South in 1999 and is currently housed in Mill Creek State Prison. His older brother, Paul, a.k.a. Big Puppet, a.k.a. Demon Ovencia, was known as an NF member in the 1980s under C number 45650. And I show was very active at San Quentin. Understand that he got released and then came back on D number 43887. He was known as being an NF member, but last I heard, he was hiding out in Florida about 20 years ago. There was Frank Weasel Olvera out of Salas. He was the half-brother of the Castanedas. I showed that he was active as a Northern Structure member in the 1980s under D number 17835. Understand that he was caught with the Nahuatl Aztec dictionary and was learning that language, which a lot of Mexican prison gang members used to speak in code. I showed he paroled in 1996, but then came back into custody in 2001 with T number is in Thomas 29147. I showed that he was housed at CMC in 2012, but is currently not in custody. There was a Daniel, a.k.a. Chacho Orozco Miranda, out of San Diego. I showed that he was NF in the late 1970s under B number 95698, which he got due to a robbery he committed in 1978. I showed he was housed at CMC in 1984, but I believe was still considered to be NF. I then showed that he was released but got popped on a bank robbery in San Diego in 1989 and sent to the feds under BOP number 51031-080. Showed that he was housed at Lompoc in 1991 and at Coleman in 2006. And was in communication with both Skip Villanueva and Mad Dog Cervantes, but was released in November 2008. There was Edward Eddie Boy Ortega out of Chiques, which is Oxnard. I showed that he was NF in the late 1970s under B number 78522 and was involved in the homicide of Rodney Hollingsworth on June 2nd, 1978 at DVI. He was validated as being NF in 1980, but I show was off that B number by at least the year 2009. There was Eddie, a.k.a. also Ortiz, who understands his entire family was hooked up with the NF out of San Ho. I show that he was NF with E numbers in Edward 771611. I show that he was housed at Corcoran in 2002 and then was popped by the feds and sent to the BOP under number 89754- 011. I show that he was housed in Atlanta in 2004 and at Lompoc in 2011, but had been released by the year 2012. There was Eddie Toro Ortiz out of Mountain View, but I show also had ties to Santa Cruz. I show that he was Northern Structure in the mid-1980s under D number 80738. I then show that he had elevated to be an NF by the year 1990, and I believe had been involved in a homicide, which probably earned him his stripes. I showed that he was housed at Pelican Bay in May of 1992, but had been released by the year 2019. There was Rene Chispas Ortiz. He was known as being an NF associate in the 1980s when he had D number 48630. Understand then he was sponsored on the active yard at CMC by Brown Bob and Smiley Ramirez. I showed that he was documented as being NF on September 16, 1983 at DVI, which is the NF's honorary birthday. Show he was involved in robberies in 1985 and I believe was convicted of a homicide, although he said another member had committed it. I show that he was at Vacaville in 1987 and at Tehachapi in May of 1987 when his cellie was Andy Chino Flores from Stockton's Little Unity. I understand that he was considered to be a captain by 1998 but dropped out shortly after that and was celled up with one-time NF shot caller Miguel Leroy Gabriel, also known as Cricket. I understand that his son, Junior, was also active in politics and is currently housed at Kern Valley State Prison. And lastly, we have Floyd Osborne out of Watson. Yes, he doesn't sound Hispanic. That's because he wasn't. He was white, but he was still considered to be one of the canales. He grew up with Mexicans in the 1960s and 1970s and acquired B number 59123. Understand that he was released from CDC, but then got popped in Texas for a robbery around 1980 and was given 99 years to life. And so that is all I have for the N and O names, as in just say no. Chale con pandillas. Once again, I don't intend to glamorize any of these individuals or groups. Just show you a little bit how it usually ends up in misery, decades locked up in jail and prison, often addicted to drugs, and often results in early death. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off. Gangsters, cops, and politicians. If I go forward, follow me. If I hesitate, push me. If they may kill me, avenge me. If I am a traitor, kill me.
Gangsters, cops, and politicians, get ready to rock. On a mission, each one of us shares